without coming in the way of their presentation, I would straight away go for listening to them, rather be a witnessing self rather than a monkeying self, to use the analogy. Nilanjana Sanyal.
Good morning, everybody. At the outset, let me express my deep gratitude to Professor Sangeeta Menon, who has given me the opportunity of being a part of this quality-rich conference. I offer my respect to the chairperson, Professor Thimappa, my co-speaker, the galaxy of renowned scientists and distinguished academicians present here. I offer my affection to young research scholars and students. Mankind is the most important living creature in this planet, the concern for whose well-being is the tune of the era. The lack of consciousness regarding the contents of self and contents of realization beyond existential concrete experiences is preventing us from enjoying the deeper paths of understanding life, creating existential crisis for all of us. Science speaks to us of an extraordinary range of interrelations. We are, from different angles, trying to understand life as such. The biologists are uncovering the fantastic and complex dances of genes that create personalities and identities, the dance that can stretch far into the past and reveal to us that these identities are composed of a swirl of different influential factors. The physicists are taking us to the door of quantum particles. Neuropsychologists are trying to tap the treasure box of mirror neurons in explaining mental phenomena. Psychologists are also multidimensionally trying to explain behavior which is conscious and not so conscious behavior patterns. Phenomenology there seems to be a reasoned inquiry to seek into the essence of the apparent experiences in life. At this juncture, my presentation is the inside-outside story of consciousness, a phenomenological reflection. Amidst the materialistic chaos of modernity, science has aspirations of offering the plateaus of calmness and serenity. The phenomenological wing of psychology tries to fathom the inner contents of self-consciousness, to locate the patterns, the outer patterns of its reflection in the outer fringes, so that attitudinal components in the forms of thoughts, feelings, desires, and fantasy can attain some quality of balance to restore tranquility within. It studies consciousness, or the natural course of experience that brings past into the present, opens up a space of possibilities from which choice makes a move to the future. The world's physical aspect, that is what it is like to be something, eludes us completely and always be like that, because the confusion reigns in what it means to know and to be a self that knows. Scientists speak of sensorial experiences, but they seem to have their frustration or confusion over the fact of not being able to decipher what experience is. They seem to be oblivious to the fact that they do not know what it is to be physical. Experience seems to be physical, but the knowledge of experience seems to be intangibly psychological. The query is, where lies the link between these two dimensions of conscious experience, and what are the basic components of the experience, the self or anything else? The idea of inside-outside story of consciousness begets here. To unfold the story at the outset, the self seems to be a mystery with its implicit and explicit components that needs clear revelation in psychological perspective. At its core, the self is not the organism and it is not physical. It seems to be an intangible emergent property of information processing. It mediates the response of the organism to stimulation from the organism's environment and thus represents itself as the agent of the organism. Anyway, being the experiencing agent, its structural and functional components are expected to offer wide vistas of understanding in the areas of philosophy as well as psychology. Mainly, the self is the experiencer. The self experiences that entails the concept of existence. Psychology, the scientific form of openness into existence and beyond existence experiential process, is trying to strike the right chord of the mind, the concept of consciousness of the self, to engrave the real pitch of subjective individuality amid so many objectivities, to link thyself with thine. This is to have full enrichment of emotionality, to guide cognition and conation in right direction, to enjoy the flow of life to its brim and escape ruts of sufferance. This is where we are trying to understand consciousness, to be away from the chaotic world and its contents of sufferings. Hence the need to probe into the process of consciousness and to draw implications of such things in life. Phenomenology, being a specific conceptual wing of psychology, introduces semiotic dimension in analysis of consciousness. Unlike cognitive, neurobiological, or so to say behavioristic modes, phenomenology holds the view that mind is the goal of the body. The existence of one's body is fact. The feeling that one's body is just the vessel for the mental processes, or rather the experiences, is the truth. The experiences belong to the realm of consciousness, the experiencer being the self. A focus on embodied self-experience inevitably leads to a decisive widening of the discussion. The externality of embodiment puts one, his actions in the public sphere, in Jungian term, this is persona. Self-consciousness involves not only an ability to make reflective judgments about our own beliefs and desires, but also includes a sense of embodied agency. This embodiment brings intersubjectivity and sociality into the picture, draws attention to the question of how certain forms of self-consciousness are intersubjectively mediated and may depend on one's social relation to others. I'll present it in a schematic diagram. Just see. My social self is the externality. Its inner part is the subjective emotionality, the sense of embodied agency, including intersubjectivity in terms of beliefs and self-desires, the inner components of the internal aspect of the self, having reflective self-judgment capacity. On the outside, this is the subjective sociality, the environmental processes, express social interrelations or relations, interpersonal relation, in terms of my actions and reactions. I'm pre-reflectively aware of myself in the presence of others. I know I'm there. I'm pre-reflective aware of being an object to other. I'm the subject of object for others, drawing possibility of social alienation. If I want to, I can stay away from people being physically amidst them. Within the fold of experience, different varieties of consciousness can be conceived. These are awakeness. This is an ability to process information about the world that deal with it in a rational fashion. And this is having a focal point in consciousness and being aware of it cognitively. Introspection is to go within oneself. Our dreams that are there, being the inner contents, can be brought out through introspection. Reportability is the verbal ability to bring out the contents what are there within ourselves. Self-consciousness, this refers to our ability to think about ourselves, our awareness of our own existence as individuals and of our distinctiveness from others. Attention needs to be there in order to be conscious of anything. The voluntary control, a behavioral act is conscious when that act is performed deliberately. And the last component is the knowledge. Someone is conscious of a fact precisely when they know it. The inside-outside aspect of consciousness covers the character aspect of consciousness is elaborated in Sartre's opinion as consciousness is present in itself. It is self-predatory. Now this very, very tough quotation of him, consciousness is itself transcendent to the extent then that it has an itself, consciousness as reflectively remains in the same place, indefinitely absorbed, devoured, and yet indefinitely intact, wholly digested, and yet wholly outside, as indigestible as stone, the digested indigestible. Consciousness is thus the identity of appearance and existence. It is pure appearance in the sense that it exists only to the degree to which it appears. To whatever extent it appears exactly as it is. It cannot appear in alternative ways. In Transcendence, Sartre attempts to reconcile the utter transparency of consciousness with its presence to reflection by positioning the two respectively in the arms of an ostensible distinction between the inside and the outside of consciousness. Granted that an absolute interiority never has an outside, yet the psychic or psyche, the transcendent object of reflective consciousness, is its outside. Consciousness could not be intrinsically empty, as Dr. Bhomik put it to us, that we have a blueprint of human genomes. It cannot be intrinsically empty and transparent. There is expected the layer of apperceptive mass, the genetic root of consciousness. So outside has invaded inside. Reflection, though it retrieves the surface glare, would nonetheless be incapable of apprehending consciousness itself. To see consciousness itself is to see through it. Reflective consciousness effaces itself in the face of pre-reflective consciousness of the world. Only one face, one manifestation remains for both. The ostensibly two cannot be distinguished. The transparence is not an intuitive presence, but rather the condition for the phenomenal capacity of being itself. But whatever may be the experience and character part of consciousness, to fathom the depth of consciousness and draw the same energy for further advancements in life, there needs to be an experiencer, the first-hand, first-personal experiencer, the self. So to unfold the functional impact of consciousness, its relation to its agent, the self, must be discussed a little. Self is an entity marked by reflexive consciousness, interpersonal rates and reputation, and executive function. Without these bindings, the concept of self becomes meaningless. Self begins when awareness turns around in a circle and offers some realization of absorption of meaning from life context itself. It draws the meaning from outside context. In its characteristic fold, it shows reflexive consciousness gives awareness to the self. This is our action. Interpersonal strings added meaning in life to the self. These are our feeling aspect. The executive platter serves self as an entity that makes choices and decisions, initiates action and takes responsibility. This is our intellectuality or cognitive aspect. These features together orient the self towards consciousness regarding external and especially regarding internal reality. The relatedness of self to consciousness seems to be the most important infrastructure of the individual self to initiate the process of improving the stay quality in the world, being enriched in internal realizational capability. Focusing our experiencing gaze on our own physical life necessarily takes place as reflection, as a turning point about a glance which has previously been directed elsewhere. The phenomenological reversal of our gaze shows that this being directed is really an immanent, essential feature of the respective experiences involved. They are called intentional experiences. Consciousness of something is just not an empty holding of something. Every phenomenon has its own total form of intention. In fact, the idea of phenomenological psychology encompasses the whole range of tasks arising out of experience of self and the experience of the other founded on it. On the phenomenological view, a minimal form of self-consciousness is a constant structural feature of conscious experience. For the phenomenologist, this immediate and first-personal givenness of experiential phenomena must be accounted for in terms of pre-reflective self-consciousness. The notion of pre-reflective self-awareness is related to the idea that experiences have a subjective feel to them, a certain phenomenal quality of what it is like or what it feels like to have them in the most basic sense of the self, of the term. Self-consciousness is not something that comes about the moment one attentively inspects or reflectively introspects one's experiences. Rather, the process seems to have its embeddedness in pre-reflective consciousness, once again pinpointing apperceptive mass contents. The reflective self-consciousness is a higher order cognition. Pre-reflective self-awareness is ongoing and more primary self-consciousness. Self-consciousness always involves self-appearance. Experience is always self-manifesting. Pre-reflective self-consciousness is not simply a quality added to the experience, an accessory. Rather, it constitutes the very mode of being of the experience. It gives us the hints, the cues of the self within. Reflective self-consciousness is an explicit, conceptual and objectifying awareness that takes a lower order consciousness at its attentional theme. In phenomenology, this is called inner perception contrasted with other. One advantage of the phenomenological view is that it is capable of accounting for psychological self-identity, that is, the experience of self-identity through time without actually having to project the self as a separate entity over and above the stream of consciousness. Whereas pre-reflective self-contents are hints, cues of understanding, insights into, but not the real thing. It is a feel rather than cognition or knowledge. The moment self becomes aware of it, it earns the quality of reflection because it is reflected to me. This I call the indications that we feel before creating anything. Somebody said in the presentation that from emptiness there arises creation. This is the pre-reflective content. In pre-reflective self-awareness, one is not confronted with thematic or explicit awareness, the experiences belonging to oneself. Rather, dealing is with the non-observational, non-objectifying self-acquaintance. It is a case for perceptual experience, experiences of desiring, feeling, and thinking. All the experiences are characterized by a feeling of mindness. As per Professor William James, Dr. Anand Paranjapi in the morning explained it to a greater extent, put it, all experience is personal. This first person givenness entails an implicit external self-reference. Within the perspective of pre-reflective self-consciousness, evidences from developmental psychology and ecological psychology suggest that there is a primitive proprioceptive form of self-consciousness already in place from birth. This primitive self-awareness precedes the mastery of language, of the ability to form conceptually informed judgments, and it may serve as a basis for more advanced types of self-consciousness. We need semiotics, development of language, the verbalization ability to bring it out to the reflective content. Selfhood emerges within infant-adult interaction. We pick up language. Selfhood is thus a process that emerges from social interaction and is sustained by cultural signifiers and practices. That is where the concept of semiosis comes in. In fact, human selfhood depends on the human form of consciousness being conditioned by the symbols that are assimilated from the cultural milieu. However, consciousness qua awareness existed prior to its appearance of this milieu and arose along with the evolution of all living beings. In its functional dimension, the interpreter encounters the sign and the object is produced. This process involves components of both inside and outside the individual. The internalization of this process is assumed to create the human sense of self. What is internalized initially derives from the actions and gestures of human social interaction. At later stages, the development of individual cultural symbols such as speech and writing, as Professor Natalia had shown us, also become very important. The notion of self-consciousness has been the subject of a rich and complex analysis in the phenomenological tradition. The recognition of the existence of primitive form of pre-reflective self-consciousness is an important starting point to understand more elaborate forms of self-consciousness that are concept and language dependent. Phenomenological analysis show these processes to be more than purely mental or cognitive events, since they are integrally involve embodiment and intersubjective dimensions. Temporality, concept of temporality in self-consciousness. Professor Paranjabhe has indicated, gave us a hint about this. According to Husserl's analysis, pre-reflective experience of any sort has a common temporal structure, such that any moment of experience contains a relational reference to the past moments of experience, a current openness to what is present, and potential anticipation of the moments of experience that are just about to happen. The retentional structure of experience does not simply disappear at the next moment, but is kept in an intentional currency, constituting a coherency that stretches over an experience's temporal duration. Thus, reflective self-consciousness, which takes pre-reflective experience as its object, is itself characterized by the same temporal structure. As a reflecting subject, I never fully coincide with myself. When I reflect, there is always something about my experience which will evade my reflective grasp the very moment itself. Bodily self-awareness, pre-reflective self-awareness, is both embodied and embedded in the world. The body provides only the egocentric spatial framework for orientation towards the world, but constitutive contribution of its mobility. A developmental analysis reveals many links between the conceptual self and its preconceptual underpinnings. Phenomenology in Husserl conception is primarily concerned with systemic reflection on an analysis of the structure of the consciousness and the phenomena that appear in the acts of consciousness. In its most basic form, phenomenology attempts to create conditions for the objective study of topics usually regarded as subjective. The object of consciousness, the last block, is called intentional object, which is constituted of perception, memory, retention, pretension, signification, etc. And consciousness is directed at the same intentional object in direct perception as it is immediately following retention of this object and the eventual remembering of it. Intentionality represents an alternative to the representational theory of consciousness, which holds that reality cannot represent an alternative to the representational theory of consciousness. Husserl countered that consciousness is not in the mind, but rather conscious of something other than itself, the intentional object, where the object is a substance or a figment of imagination. Hence, phenomenological method relies on description of phenomenon to give meaning to consciousness. In a phenomenological matrix, for Hegel, phenomenology is an approach to philosophy that begins with an exploration of phenomena that presents itself to us in conscious experience as a means to finally grasp the absolute logical, ontological, and metaphysical spirit, which he called dialectical phenomenology. For Husserl, phenomenology is the reflective study of the essence of consciousness. This is called transcendental phenomenology. Heidegger believed that Husserl's approach overlooked basic structural features of both the subject and the object of experience and expanded phenomenological inquiry to encompass our understanding of experience of being itself. In his term, this is Dasein. This making phenomenology the method of the study of being, the ontology of the self. Human being, Dasein involves what might be called an implicitly sensed ground, horizon, or clearing, which is the context or totality within which experience occurs. The horizon is, in a sense, the most important aspect of human existence, for it is the very condition or possibility of anything at all appearing or being known. Moreover, it is only place where the being of either man or the world is disclosed. Self-consciousness is to be understood in this intrinsic feature of primary experience. Phenomenologists typically argue that feature that makes mental state conscious is located within the state itself. Hence, if pre-reflective contents are assumed to be the inside story of consciousness, the reflective contents will definitely cover the outside facade of it. In contrast to pre-reflective self-consciousness, which delivers an implicit sense of self at an experiential or phenomenal level, reflective self-consciousness is an explicit, conceptual, and objectifying awareness that takes a lower order consciousness as its attentional theme. This I would like to explain a little. I have taken the help of other theoretical approaches in psychology. Consciousness is the self element. In psychology, this self is the person. In behavioristic and structuralistic orientation, the same self, the person, is called the behaving agent. Their inner component is genetic, bodily, neurological ability. And in psychoanalysis, Freud said, we have unconscious contents of personality or self-system that needs verbalization to be expressed in the outer world of conscious experience or implied contents. And this inside story has its impact on actions and reactions. In humanistic Rogerian concept, we need to have this person, the self, as expressive self-entity who can really express the feelings. And these are flow of events in life leading to conscious integration of them within ourselves. In the, just 2 more minutes. Existent experiencer is the phenomenology. This part, existent experiencer is the self in phenomenology. Conscious experience needed, the urge is there in the inside part, and on the outside part, the conscious reflective self is there. So in phenomenology, the subjective object, the self, is there inside, and the conscious reflective self is there outside. These two are constituting the Dasein, the being in the ontology. So, knowing the inside-outside facades of consciousness, of self, from phenomenological aspect, a state has arrived to draw its implication in higher planes of consciousness in the realm of transcendence. Hofmeyr is felt to be quoted here. This world has always meant something. It just did not know it. Now, with the evolution of self-awareness, it knows, or rather we know it. Here lies the context of Dasein, the being in the highest level of ontology. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sanyal. Paper is open for discussion.
Thank you, Professor Sanyal, for your first slide and the 34th slide. The first slide brings all the sciences together and says you draw a meaning from it. And you exemplify it by bringing all the parameters within psychology to show how they all can coalesce into an understandable framework.
Now, the collage of the self that I spoke of.
Right. And what I would like to talk about is extend it beyond and bring some observations from Carl Jaspers, the greatest of the phenomenologists of our times as far as I am concerned. Now, it is relevant in this particular conference where we had physics, maths on the first day, and biology on the second day, and phenomenology, consciousness on the third day. He made a very interesting observation as a phenomenologist, that when you want to study something as a researcher, you have to look at two angles. The first one is what he called prejudice, which he described as a blinker. Mm-hmm. The next one is what he called presupposition. So I will give examples from the prejudice element more and very briefly touch upon presupposition. The prejudice he called, all of us as scientists have inbuilt kind of blinkers. So first one he called theoretical blinker. So we all have theoretical blinker. If you are a physicist and a mathematician, you tend to view the phenomenon according to your blinker. The next is called philosophical blinker, where you have your own ethical, moral values with which you look at it. And the third, he called false analogies. These are similes and metaphors. When somebody says unconscious is like an iceberg, conscious being on top, 1/8, you see it as real. I mean, Freud never measured an iceberg to dictate it. So even in physics, people have given examples of analogies and metaphors which are not real. So you give a model to make it clear to the other person. So false analogies also can be misleading. So I'm talking about all the things that can be misleading. Then you have what is called somatic prejudice, which is everything biological is real. Everything non-biological or psychological is unreal. So you have a somatic prejudice. Then he interestingly says the methodology of statistics, that itself is a blinker. That you think numbers can explain everything. Once you have the numbers, if there is correlation, that is causation. So he pointed out all these parameters that all of us as scientists have built-in blinkers. So I'm sure when you speak, somebody goes to sleep. When they speak, you go to sleep. Because you have the blinker that only my theory is the right one. But what is most interesting is his presupposition, where he says, any observer, empathy is the presupposition which enhances your perception. All other are blinkers. But one thing that expands you and enhances you is empathy. Thank you.
Wonderful comment.
Professor Sanyal, you can answer all the questions.
Okay.
I would request you to be very brief comments as the questions because of the time constraint. Please.
Professor Sanyal, this is Srijata. I'm a PhD student at this institute. I have two basic questions. One is, you very beautifully define self as the experiencer and consciousness being the experience. You also said that self is an emergent property of the neurophysiological processes. Yes. Given that the underlying neuro connections of experience and memory, we know a little bit about it, why do you then claim that self is not a physical entity? That is my first question. And second, is it not possible to have consciousness without intention at all?
Let me comment on this because I'll forget everything. Self is definitely not physical in the sense that it definitely does have the physical entity elements, the neurobiological system, the social components being added to that. But the composition of all these contents just do not result in the proper physicality of itself. Being a psychologist, and specifically from the angle of psychoanalysis, I feel a different indicative contents are there, which are mostly in the feeling tone. That's why I mentioned it cannot be called just physical. Definitely self has a physical entity, otherwise no question of studying it, no question of having an outline understanding of its inner processes. But the subjectivity element in the self is the point of saying that it is just not the physical content that is there.
Yeah.
And you had a second question regarding?
Is consciousness not possible at all without intentionality?
To me, it appears it's not possible. Some intention, some pre-orientation of the self needs to be there in order to be trying to be conscious of something.
Sriramurthy from the Dalbagh Education Institute. See, we have to complement our understanding of the self with the psychologies of yoga and Advaita Vedanta. For them, it is Jnanadhikaranam Atma. The repository of consciousness is Atman. And in wakeful state, and it is Atma Manasa Samjujyate, Manaha Indriyana, Indriya Marthena. That is how extroversion takes place. When it comes to internal perceptions of thoughts, feelings, etc., there the Chittavrittis themselves are acting. When Atmajnana or subjective, that is the self-knowledge is required, then the Chittavrittis are focused on the self, introversion, and that is good looking within. And what happens is, according to yoga, the Chittavrittis themselves get dissolved when it is they are focused on the Atma. And then in the deep sleep state, Chaitanya Vrittis come into being. It is the Chaitanya Vritti that is that you are knowing yourself in the deep sleep state. And when you go higher to the Turiya Avastha, it is the Keval, that is the Atma Vrittis, that Atmanam Atmani Anusandhanaha. That is what we will know in the Kumar Sambhav, how Shiva reflected on himself.
This concept was discussed in great detail day before yesterday while neuropsychological concepts were being explained.
When we come
it's complement.
When we come to self-realization, self-understanding the self, I think these psychologies should be used to get at the right answer.
Thank you. Thank you for your comment. Yes?
My question is about the possible similarity between Patanjali Yoga and eidetic bracketing in Husserl. The reason for asking this question actually relates to your answer to a previous question, whether Husserl took intentionality for granted as an axiomatic truth and was unable to transcend it.
You are correct, sir. You are correct.
Yeah, reason, okay. The reason for this is that Husserl at one point says that he encountered some existential benefit out of his procedure, which is out of this world kind of, but all this he puts it in a footnote, and toward the end of his life, he closes out his project and assigns writing of its epitaph to Eugene Fink. I mean, this seemed to be coming so close east and west, and then it fell apart. I'm wondering whether you have any reflections on that.
To overcome the limitations of the contents of Husserl, most probably Heidegger tried his level best to bring into our knowledge this concept of Dasein and in the ontological form of development of the self. I feel here to connect this intentionality concept with that of Madam's the blinkers in the form of prejudice that is there. I would say that these blinkers are there in all of us, and they indicate the limitations of the self and limitations of the environmental processes. We all are trying to know so many things, but there is a threshold point for all of us. This is totally subjective. But beyond that, in the proper ambience of knowledge sharing, in the proper ambience of knowledge deriving process, we are at the same time trying to overcome our internal prejudiced contents and try to be in a plate, or rather platter, we can all stand together to feel that whatever we say from different sciences, from different philosophy, from different art and fine art contents, it is the same self that needs evolution to the ultimate transcendence. That is our ultimate motto in life.
Nature and Shobindun in evolutionary thinking. One short comment and one short query. Comment is, I liked your presentation very much.
Thank you.
Found it very resonant, especially with the theme and with the approach. And I was impressed by your word, and says a lot. The outside has invaded the inside. And a short query, which I'd asked Natali earlier, and it prompts me to ask you, if you have heard of a tool called KBI, as Shobindu puts it, knowledge by identity. Because all this, a querier's angle, it's a story between the percipient and the percept. How we inquire, what we come out with. And as she was saying, where there is I or non-I, and as Alex was saying, itself tries to know itself. So KBI tries to, bridge that gap and makes it possible for us to integrate, and the I becomes the non-I. So your considered view on that, if you have heard or if some...
I don't know about this KBI, but I'll definitely check this reference. But what I feel is important, the moment you mentioned about it, yesterday also, at the end of the day, we all were trying to say something about this experimentation of everything, empirical orientations in life. Maybe this KBI is one of the tools to make this empiricism would be brought into by this KBI into the realm of consciousness to bring out mediated between the inside and outside aspect of consciousness.
See if you come across to it.
I'm Anandan. I'm a computer scientist, so very naive in philosophy. I'm actually just become confused about two terms and a third term. So consciousness versus self, and then the role of intentionality. Listening to all the talks in the morning, if you can briefly elaborate what you mean by those three terms.
The self has the physical appearance aspect, and in the consciousness, one aspect of consciousness is trying to fathom the fact, okay, the contents, the properties are there in terms of our physical appearance, but something is there inside also. The inside components of the self, being the experiencer of consciousness, must be brought out. If these two things are taken together, they give us the concept of intentionality. The proprioceptive concept, or a priori contents, which we believe in philosophy, and the concept of noumena and phenomena comes in. Certain things are there within ourselves at birth. The system, when the child is not born being totally empty in its content. These contents, which we really cannot bring out in the form of conscious experience, are called apperceptive mass. On the basis of this apperceptive mass, we develop our predispositions to understand things in a specific way. This is called intentionality.
Thank you.